How do you react when betrayal doesn't come from a stranger, but from the two people you trusted most in your life? At 75 years old, I thought I had already survived every kind of pain a marriage could offer. I believed there were lines so sacred that no one would ever cross them. I was wrong. It didn't start with a scream or a confession. It started with something small, almost laughably ordinary. I was standing in my kitchen, holding a cup of coffee that had already gone cold, listening to my husband talk about errands. His voice sounded calm, rehearsed, almost polite. Then he said a sentence so casually that it took my mind a few seconds to catch up with the meaning. In that gap of silence, something inside me shifted forever. I had been married for decades. A long marriage, the kind people admire from the outside. Shared routines, shared history, shared sacrifices. We raised a family, endured illnesses, survived financial struggles, buried friends, buried dreams, and still stayed together. I believed loyalty was the one thing we never questioned, especially not within our own blood. My mother was 95, frail, dependent, someone I had spent years caring for, protecting, defending. She lived close by. She needed help with everything, and because of that, my husband was often around her, helping, talking, sitting longer than necessary. At the time, I told myself it was kindness, compassion, respect for an elderly woman who had lived a hard life. Looking back now, I can see how desperately my mind tried to protect me. Every strange feeling was explained away. Every uncomfortable thought was silenced. After all, who would ever imagine something like this? Who would suspect their own mother? Who would question their husband in such a way without feeling ashamed for even thinking it? But the truth has a way of leaking through cracks you refuse to look at. A tone of voice, a change in routine, a glance that lasts half a second too long. At 75, you don't move fast anymore, but your instincts still work. And mine had been screaming for years, quietly, patiently, waiting for me to finally listen. That morning in the kitchen, as his words settled into the air between us, I realized my life had been standing on a lie so carefully constructed that it took decades to see it clearly. A secret that rewrote my marriage, my childhood, and my understanding of love itself. And once that realization arrived, there was no way back to the woman I was just minutes before. If this story is already making you uncomfortable, that's not an accident. Stories like this aren't meant to entertain lightly. They're meant to expose how complicated love, loyalty, marriage, and family really are, especially after decades of shared history. When secrets last this long, they don't just hurt one person, they quietly shape entire lives. If you've ever wondered whether silence can be just as damaging as betrayal, or if you've lived through a relationship where something felt wrong but you couldn't prove it, your perspective matters here. Leave a comment and tell me what you think really hurts more, the betrayal itself or discovering it after a lifetime has already passed. Even a single word or short phrase can help others feel less alone. If this story made you pause, reflect, or see relationships differently, please leave a like so this conversation can reach people who need it. And consider subscribing if you want more real, unfiltered stories about marriage, love, secrets, and the difficult truths that surface late in life. When you stay married for as long as I did, the story of your relationship becomes something you repeat to yourself like a fact. You stop questioning it. You stop examining the cracks. You tell yourself, this is solid, this is proven, this has survived everything. I truly believed my marriage was untouchable, not because it was perfect, but because it was old. Decades together create a dangerous illusion of safety. We met when we were young, before life hardened us. We built our marriage in small, ordinary ways. Shared meals, shared bills, shared responsibilities. There was no grand romance anymore, but there was familiarity, and familiarity felt like loyalty. I believed love matured into routine, That passion softened into companionship, and that was what success looked like after 50 years. People would ask us the usual questions. How did you make it work so long? What's the secret? We'd laugh. Patience, compromise, forgiveness. All the correct words. And I believed them when I said them. I believed that enduring meant understanding, that staying meant choosing each other every day, even when things were dull or difficult. What I didn't realize was how easily endurance can mask emotional distance. Somewhere along the way, our conversations became practical instead of personal. We talked about appointments, medications, groceries, repairs. We stopped talking about fears. We stopped talking about desires. We stopped talking about anything that might disrupt the calm surface we worked so hard to maintain. I told myself this was normal aging, that after a certain point, marriages become quieter, less demanding, more predictable. I thought predictability was proof of trust. I didn't see that predictability can also hide avoidance. It can hide needs that are no longer spoken out loud. It can hide loneliness, even when two people share the same bed. I also believed family boundaries were unbreakable, that no matter what happened between a husband and wife, certain lines were simply not crossed. That belief allowed me to lower my guard completely. It never occurred to me that betrayal could wear the face of caregiving, or that closeness could grow under the excuse of responsibility. Looking back, I can see how much comfort I took in the idea of permanence. 50 years felt like a guarantee. It felt like proof that whatever flaws we had, whatever silences existed, they couldn't possibly lead to something destructive. I was wrong. Longevity doesn't protect you from betrayal. Sometimes it only delays it. At 75, I understand now that love left unattended doesn't disappear loudly. It fades quietly, making space for things you never imagined possible. And by the time you notice the shift, the foundation you trusted has already changed beneath your feet. Before we go further, I'd really like to hear from you. Do you believe long marriages are safer, or do you think time can sometimes hide the deepest fractures? It started so subtly that I barely noticed it at first. My husband had always been close to my mother. She needed help, and he was a kind man. He went over, checked in, helped her with small tasks, and I thought nothing of it. After all, family helps each other, right? At 75, I can see how my trust and assumptions blinded me. The signs were there all along, hidden in plain sight. It was the little things that didn't seem significant at the time. Extra phone calls, longer visits, subtle laughter at things I didn't understand. Moments when he seemed distracted, distant, but always careful not to let me catch it. My mother's frailty gave him the perfect excuse to be around her constantly, to do things for her that seemed harmless, compassionate, even noble. And I let myself believe in his innocence because love had taught me to trust him completely. Over the years, I rationalized every uneasy feeling. I told myself it was just kindness, patience, devotion. He was helping, supporting, caring. What mother wouldn't want a son-in-law to be attentive, especially at 95? I ignored the nagging unease, the moments that didn't fit. I even praised him for his devotion. I didn't see that devotion had become something else entirely. Looking back, I see the pattern in a terrifying clarity. My husband, once my protector, had been cultivating something secret, a connection with my mother that went far beyond care. Every shared smile, every private joke, every longer-than-necessary visit was part of a truth I wasn't ready to face. And because I trusted him, because I believed in the sanctity of our marriage and the natural bond between husband and mother-in-law, I never questioned it. Not once. It wasn't a single event that revealed everything. It was years of small, almost invisible acts that added up to betrayal. By the time I realized what was happening, The damage was complete. My sense of reality, of family, of trust, was shattered. The people I loved most, the ones I had devoted my life to, had rewritten the rules without telling me. And the cruelest part? I never saw it coming. Every glance, every gesture that seemed ordinary was a piece of a puzzle that I wasn't meant to understand until much later. That's the nightmare of betrayal at this age. It hides under decades of normalcy, under layers of trust, patience, and familial love. It waits until you're vulnerable, until your defenses are lowered by the sheer weight of years spent believing in something that no longer exists the way you imagined. I will never forget the day I finally understood the full extent of their betrayal. It wasn't dramatic, no shouting, no confrontation at first, just a quiet, unbearable clarity. I was sitting in my living room, doing something mundane, when the weight of years of deceit settled over me like a physical presence. That small, ordinary moment turned into a revelation that would haunt me forever. For decades, I had believed in the strength of my marriage, in the trust between us, and in the unquestionable bond of family. Every dinner, every shared holiday, every ordinary conversation reinforced the illusion that my life had been ordinary, safe, predictable. And then, with one simple confirmation, that illusion shattered. The person I trusted most, my husband, had been crossing lines I never thought possible, with my mother, of all people. And she, at 95, had stepped willingly into a relationship that should have been unimaginable. The emotional shock was immediate and total. I felt a torrent of feelings I could barely process: anger, nausea, disbelief, sorrow, and a sense of humiliation I had never known. Everything I had built my life around, marriage, loyalty, family, suddenly seemed meaningless, fragile, even farcical. My mind raced through the decades of shared history, trying to pinpoint when this started, when the first deviation occurred, when the first step into betrayal was taken. Each memory twisted into a potential clue, a sign I had ignored. What hurt most was not only the betrayal itself, but the realization that I had been blind to it, that I had trusted, loved, and respected people who had rewritten the rules behind my back. Ordinary acts, helping, caring, visiting, were now colored by deceit. Every gesture that once seemed kind or noble became suspect, and every memory, joyful or mundane, was tainted with doubt. Yet, even in this emotional wreckage, there was a paradoxical clarity. The secrecy, the decades of hidden truth, the small, silent signs, all had culminated in a moment that forced me to see the reality of my life unflinchingly. It was terrifying, humiliating, and yet necessary. Because without this brutal acknowledgement, I could never begin to process the depth of the betrayal or reclaim any sense of myself. After the truth hit, the emotional impact was instantaneous and devastating. I felt as though the ground beneath me had disappeared. Everything I believed about love, loyalty, and family was suddenly meaningless. The life I had built, the marriage I had nurtured for decades, the care I had given to both my husband and my mother, it all felt like it had been built on sand. The collapse wasn't just mental, it was physical. My chest felt heavy, my hands shook, my stomach churned. I couldn't breathe normally. Every familiar sound in the house seemed amplified, every tick of the clock a reminder that time had been stolen from me, years spent unaware, deceived by the two people I loved most. I felt as if I were staring into a void of betrayal that had been patiently waiting for me all these years. Anger surged, raw and unfiltered. How could he? How could my mother? Both of them knew the consequences. Both of them understood the lines that should never have been crossed. Yet, they chose to ignore them, to prioritize desire over loyalty, passion over respect, selfishness over love. And I, who had devoted my life to family, to care, to devotion, was left to pick up the pieces of a reality I never wanted to confront. I tried to speak, to demand answers, but words felt inadequate, hollow. How do you articulate the magnitude of being betrayed by your own husband and mother simultaneously? No argument, no explanation, no justification could soften the blow. I found myself oscillating between disbelief and fury, sorrow and shame. My heart ached, not only for the betrayal itself, but for the loss of trust, for the years I had spent blind, and for the way everything I thought I knew about love had been rewritten. And yet, even in the collapse, there were moments of reflection. I realized the magnitude of what had happened was not just about them. It was about me, my choices, my willingness to trust, my patience, my own blindness. It forced me to examine myself, my life, my marriage, and the boundaries I had allowed to blur over decades. This is the point where many might feel hopeless, where anger can consume completely. But even amid the wreckage, clarity begins to emerge. The betrayal is real, the pain is raw, and the sense of loss is undeniable. But the journey toward understanding, recovery, and reclaiming a sense of self starts here. When the confessions finally came, they didn't bring relief. They brought a new kind of pain, sharper and more humiliating than the silence that came before. I remember sitting there, listening, my body completely still while my mind struggled to stay present. Part of me wanted to scream, part of me wanted to disappear, and part of me wanted to wake up from what felt like a cruel, distorted dream. My husband spoke first. His voice was calm, almost careful, as if choosing the right words could soften what he had done. He talked about loneliness, about feeling invisible as we aged, about how caring for my mother had created a bond, how it just happened, how there was never an intention to hurt me. Every sentence felt like a blade wrapped in politeness. There was no rage in his voice, no desperation, just justification. And that, somehow, hurt even more. Then my mother spoke. 95 years old, fragile, her voice trembling not with shame but with self-protection. She said she hadn't planned it. She said she never thought it would go this far. She said she felt alive again, seen, wanted. Hearing those words from the woman who raised me shattered something fundamental inside me. A mother is supposed to protect her child, not compete with her, not replace her, not erase her. What stunned me most wasn't what they said, but what they didn't. There was no real apology, no recognition of the depth of the damage. Their explanations centered on their feelings, their needs, their loneliness. I was spoken about as if I were an obstacle, a circumstance, not a person whose life had been fractured. Decades of marriage reduced to an inconvenience, a lifetime of trust dismissed as collateral damage. As they spoke, I realized something chilling. The betrayal hadn't begun with their relationship. It began the moment they decided my pain would be manageable, that I would survive it quietly, that my role, as it had always been, was to absorb the shock and keep the family intact. In that moment, I understood how deeply invisible I had become inside my own life. And yet, as devastating as those confessions were, they brought a brutal clarity. There was no misunderstanding, no exaggeration, no version of events that could be softened with time. The truth stood naked and irreversible between us, and once spoken aloud, it changed everything. Because after the truth is revealed, silence no longer protects anyone. After the confessions, there was no dramatic ending, no scene that felt complete or satisfying. Life didn't pause to acknowledge what had been destroyed. It simply continued, and I was left standing in the ruins of everything I thought defined me. At 75, starting over isn't about rebuilding a future. It's about surviving the present with what little certainty you have left. The word family lost its meaning overnight. Holidays became impossible to imagine. Memories turned toxic. Every photograph felt like evidence of a lie I had unknowingly lived inside for decades. I didn't just lose my husband. I lost my mother in a way that grief doesn't prepare you for. She was still alive, but the woman I trusted, the woman who raised me, no longer existed in my mind the same way. That kind of loss doesn't come with a funeral. It comes with silence. I questioned myself relentlessly. Was I foolish? Too trusting? Too passive? Did I miss something obvious that everyone else could see? These questions loop endlessly when betrayal happens this late in life. There's no comforting illusion that you have time to fix things, to make better choices next time. Time becomes brutally honest. You are forced to sit with what happened, without distraction, without denial. And yet, something unexpected happened in that stillness. Beneath the shock and humiliation, a strange clarity began to form. I realized that what hurt most wasn't just what they did, but how long I had lived for others without questioning whether I was truly seen. The betrayal didn't create that invisibility. It exposed it. I had spent decades being dependable, understanding, quiet. I absorbed discomfort to keep peace. I ignored my instincts to protect harmony. And in the end, that silence became the space where something unthinkable could grow. That realization was painful, but it was also the first honest conversation I had ever had with myself. I don't know what forgiveness looks like yet. I don't know if reconciliation is even possible, or if it should be. What I do know is that love without boundaries becomes erasure. And at 75, I am learning, perhaps too late, that choosing yourself is not cruelty. It is survival. If you've stayed with me through this story, I'd really like to hear from you. What do you think is harder to survive? Betrayal itself, or realizing how long you ignored your own voice? You can comment with a word like betrayal or silence, or anything that feels true to you. If you stayed with me until the very end of this story, thank you. Stories like this aren't easy to hear, and they're even harder to live through. If this experience made you reflect on love, marriage, family, or the secrets that can exist inside long relationships, I invite you to stay connected here. Please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more real confessional stories about lifelong marriages, late revelations, forgiveness, betrayal, and the emotional truths that surface in old age. Leave a like if this story kept you watching until the end. It helps these conversations reach people who may feel completely alone in similar situations. And I'd really appreciate it if you left a comment. You can simply write, "I'm still listening," or "I stayed until the end," or share a short thought about what part of this story affected you the most. Every comment matters more than you know.